welcome to Little Seeds of Faith. This is Joanie. Today, I would love to talk to you and to explore the topic of what are the commandments. I want to explore how can we follow them in our everyday lives? What are they? And is it important for us to know all the commands given in the Bible? Are there some that are more important than others? Now, I'm sure you've heard about the 10 Commandments, the ones that were given to Moses and the Israelites once they were away from the Egyptians and their way to the Promised Land. These 10 Commandments were written on stone tablets. They were so important that they were placed in a special box to be kept forever. And this box was called the Ark of the Covenant. And in that box was also placed manna and Aaron's budding rod. And those were all three things were so important to God and the Israelites that they were put in the box to be kept forever. Now let's explore what are commandments and see what the Bible has to say about them. Now, if you've been listening for a while, you should know by now that one of the first places I like to go when exploring a new topic is the dictionary. You know that I find it very helpful knowing the meaning of words. So when I look up the word commandment, it means a rule to be observed. So something that we should be doing. And there are other words that we can use instead of commands. We could use the word law, rule, and direction. So we could say the 10 laws, the 10 rules, the 10 directions, or the 10 commandments. Now, the person giving the commandment is in charge, and they should probably know what they're talking about. Probably someone like a boss or a parent. But in this place, we have God who is giving the commandments. I think he knows what he's talking about. Now, the person who is receiving the command is usually new and needs guidance. Here in Exodus, we see that the Israelites are a new nation. Remember, they just left Egypt and the Egyptian rules, and they're not used to being on their own. So God, when he took them out of Egypt, is trying to teach them and show them how they should be as a nation. They are new, and they need to know how they should be. And so God is giving them commands or laws or rules to follow to help them to be a great nation and great people. Now, these commands, these 10 commandments I'm talking about that Moses wrote, we can read them in Exodus chapter 20. So I'm going to take the time to read Exodus 20 all the way until verse 17. So we have here, and God spoke all these words. Remember, these are words that God spoke. He says that I, God, am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Now you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make it for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, or his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Whew, that was a lot. Those are the most well-known commands, and there are 10 of them. But did you know that these 10 commands are not the only ones? There are actually 613 commandments or laws that were given by God to the Israelites. Can you imagine that? Your parents not just giving you 10 rules to follow, but over 600? That is a lot. Could you keep them straight? I would not be able to. These 613 laws are not to control the Israelites, but to show them a better way of life. God doesn't want to control them. He wants them to live a good life. He wants them to show them a way to serve Him, a way to treat other people and themselves. If the Israelites were able to keep all these rules, they could be living a good life. But what we're going to find out, you can't keep all 613 laws. So what's the point of them if you can't keep them? Well, we'll get back to that in a little bit. But let's take a dive a little deeper into the 10 commandments that I just read. And let's kind of summarize them. Now, the first 4 are all about how we should serve God. I'm going to read them for you again. The first 4 is you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Those 4 are about how do we serve God. The next 6 are all about how we should treat other people. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet. Those are all about how you treat other people. Now, I've broken these 10 commandments down and placed them to 2 categories: serve God and serve other people. The idea of these commands is to transform your heart so that in the Israelites' hearts and in our hearts is a desire to love God and to give Him glory. Not only can these 10 commands be put into these two categories, but all the other ones can be placed in the same categories. When we study and learn about these commands and laws, it helps us to be better children of God. And in Deuteronomy 6:6, God says that these commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. You need to know them. You need to understand them and live by them. And so there are so many other verses that show us how to love God. Well, we know that one way to love in God is to search His Word and to write His commands on our heart, to praise Him. And when we do those things, our whole body will want to serve God in all the ways that we know how. And what God says in the Old Testament, in Exodus that we have just read, is carried on by Jesus, Paul, Peter, and many others in the New Testament. So it's not just an Old Testament commands. They are also talked about in the New Testament. Reading the Bible as a whole is important. If we only read the Old Testament, we would miss out on what Jesus says about these commands. So when Jesus was preaching, and the Sadducees are Jews that wanted to follow all the laws exactly to the T. They were doing all the laws just right. Were so very important to the Sadducees. And so they wanted to trick Jesus. And they asked him, what are the greatest of these laws? And they wanted to make sure that they were getting it all right. Let's read about this interaction in Matthew 22:34. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Now, I didn't read either of those 2 laws from the 10 commandments. They didn't say anything about loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and didn't say about loving your neighbor. But remember, those were the 2 categories. Jesus didn't respond and say, well, if you just keep the Sabbath, then you will be all right. No, he made it very clear that the greatest command is simple: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. Well, that just happens to be the first category that we place the first four of the Ten Commandments in. So the question arises, how do you love God with all your heart, soul, and mind? And well, it can be quite simple. Don't worship any other gods or things. Don't put anything above God. Don't use God's name as if it is a commonplace and not important, which is not using his name in vain. And by remembering to take the time to be with others who believe the same as you, where you can worship God together, like keeping the Sabbath. Once we have this first part down, the next category which Jesus places the commands in is to love your neighbor as yourself. When we value others just as much as we value our own life, we will treat them well. We won't lie to them. We won't cheat them. We won't want what they have because we see them as one of God's children just as we are. We understand that God has a different plan for them than he has for us. Romans 13:8 says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. God knew and understood that we can't follow every one of those commands. But when we learn about them, meditate on them, and place them in our hearts, we can live a new life, not chasing after our desires, but we can have a life of service. Jesus shows us how to follow these commands. The verse in Romans I just read states that the person who loves others fulfills the law. He does it. When you love others, you are doing all the commands. Loving God and loving your neighbor is fulfilling all the laws. That is what Jesus is telling us. Now, the last part of Jesus' reply to the Pharisees is to keep remembering. All the law and prophets hang on these two commands. The two commands of love God with all that you have and love your neighbor are so important that these are the things you need to strive to do. Don't worry about all the little details of all the other little laws, because when you love God and others, the rest should fall into place, and your heart will know what to do. Deuteronomy 10:12 says, and now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. And Deuteronomy 13:4 says, it is the Lord your God you must follow, and him you must revere. Keep his commands and obey him. Serve him and hold fast to him. Learning about the Ten Commandments is just the beginning of truly knowing and understanding God. The Ten Commandments help us to realize that we cannot perfectly obey the law. They demonstrate that we have all sinned and are therefore in need of God's mercy and grace, available only through faith in Jesus Christ. Romans 3, verse 22 through 24 says, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe, for there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. Love God. Love the fact that God created you in his image, and then love those around you. What I asked at the beginning was, what are the commands? And is one more important than the others? And what does the Bible say about them? I want you to remember that it is impossible to keep all 613 laws, or commands, and rules. But what we need to do is to look behind the laws and into the mind and character of God himself, who gave them to the Israelites and to us. When we look into the commandments, we see a perfect, loving God, a wholeness of God himself, and the wholeness to be all that you are designed to be, not failing and unable to be perfect, but to be everything that you were made to be, an image of God. This is not easy. No one said it would be. We have a very high calling, and that is to love God with everything we have. And when we do that, we can love those around us too. When we keep reading the Bible, loving God and His creation, we are one step closer. Joshua 22:5 says, "But be very careful to keep the commandment and the law that Moses the servant of the Lord gave you, which is to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to Him, to keep His commands, to hold fast to Him, and to serve Him with all your heart and with all your soul."